woman from the West Midlands claims a court's decision not to let her care for her grandchildren led to her daughter's death. It comes as new figures show at least 650 so-called forced adoptions took place across Birmingham, Dudley and Walsall in the last 5 years. The UK is the only country in Europe to have a forced adoption law, which means a court can decide to take children from their parents and place them with another family without their consent. This woman wanted to look after her grandchildren, but a judge ruled against her. She's been speaking anonymously to our reporter Olivia Morley.
My daughter was in a relationship with a man who was a narcissist, a very violent partner. Social services got involved because of this relationship. She was very weak, very low. She'd been beaten to a pulp. She had no bank accounts. They were all in his name, so she had no money. The house was a mess. It'd been broken into bits, and she placed the children with me while she tried to sort her own life out. I was a foster carer being paid Coventry City Council, so she placed them with me thinking they'd be safe while she sorted her own life out, which she did. We got her a bank account, we got her a benefits put into that bank account. She started getting the house decorated, replaced the furniture, would have nothing to do with her ex-partner. The children were with me, and I had a knock at the door by a social worker. Social worker came into the home, sat down at my table, and told us he knew everything was fine, the children were safe with me. I told him I was a foster carer and had been for many years, and he agreed, he knew. He says, but he needed some say in the children's life. Would my daughter sign the Section 20? And she refused. And this was a Friday evening, and he left. We were slightly suspicious, I was. So on the Monday morning, we phoned a solicitor who then was phoning round social services to find out what was going on, and was informed that there was an emergency interim order going into court on the Tuesday morning. We got into the courts. I wasn't party to the court hearing, and I'm sure there's a lot of grandparents out there that understand that part too. Didn't know my rights, obviously. I'm not a lawyer. I had my daughter's solicitor telling her not to let me through the courtroom doors. I could damage the case, and it was adjourned. She was well aware then. The power of social services, the power the social worker had. It was set up for her to lose. She did have problems. She never denied the problems she had. She agreed that she needed help. She agreed that she needed support. I couldn't help my daughter any more than I could, and social services alienated every one of us and removed these children.
Do you think if the legal system was different and these adoptions that happen without consent of a parent were scrapped and that was no longer allowed, and there was a reform and things changed, do you think your daughter would still be alive?
I know my daughter would still be alive.
We've been in touch with Coventry City Council, and it says every child who is considered for adoption is extremely vulnerable and has their own unique needs and challenges, and every single one deserves the very best care. It says each case and child's circumstance is different, and that in this one, although the grandmother had been a kinship carer in the past, the court felt that a plan for adoption for the other children was in its best interests. Now, Professor Anna Gupta is co-author of the Adoption Inquiry, which was set up by the British Association of Social Workers. Joins us now. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Why are these so-called forced adoptions taking place?
I suppose firstly, I think forced adoption's a really unhelpful term. I'd rather call it a non-consensual adoption, because it's the court that decides to override the parent's consent. Their court processes, social services or children's services apply to courts to apply for care orders and then for adoption orders if they believe that it's in the interests of the children.
Is placing a child with a family member always the preference then?
It needs to be considered. It needs to be considered before a recommendation for adoption is made. Parents are assessed or grandparents or relatives assessed as part of the process, and those assessments put to the court. Sometimes it's agreed and sometimes it's not. Parents can challenge those assessments through their lawyers. Grandparents don't normally have party status, are not normally part of the court proceedings. They can apply for it, but they won't get legal aid. It's very expensive.
Now, as I mentioned, you're co-author of the adoption inquiry. What have you actually found then?
I think that adoption, it can work for a small minority of children. But it needs to be seen in the context of the child protection system and the lack of support that is available increasingly with cuts to services, with family support services, with domestic abuse services, with mental health services. I think it needs to be seen in that context. And
Are you actually thinking about it? Are you saying that councils are finding it easier and more economical, just easier to put children up for adoption, to take them away from their parents?
I think that the early help services are being cut, and so by the time it gets to the situation where it comes to children's services, often the family situation is more difficult, and there aren't the support services there to help and manage any difficulties that are that families are going through. So at times it is about taking it to court because there aren't the options that certainly were available in the past.
Professor Anna Gupta, thank you very much indeed for talking to us on the programme from the British Association of Social Workers. The Department for Education, which is responsible for the training of social workers, added that every decision regarding adoption is made with the best interest of the child at its heart, and the ultimate decision to remove a child from his or her family rests with the independent courts. It's 14 minutes to 9. Travel for the